So we'll get started here then. We're just waiting for Laura Ziegler from KCUR, as I've said, is caught up in traffic. Thank you again. Just to remind you sort of what we're going to be doing here today. So we're going to have a panel discussion of 30 minutes at most, okay? So I've got some questions here to get through with our panel members. This is being filmed as well, of course, for the college and will be available afterwards at some point. So we'll be sharing that out. But what I'd like to do is just to say panel discussion first of all, then a breakout session. So as we're having the panel discussion, if you have questions that you want to ask, keep hold of those, and then you can meet the panelists afterwards and have a chat. We've got pizza, we've got soda as well. Please meet them. We've also got some other members of faculty we would like you to meet as well. We've got Professor Nate Heron there, if you could just raise a hand. Nate Heron teaches broadcast performance and is one of the voices of many of the sports teams in the Kansas City area, including the Chiefs. So please take the opportunity of speaking to Nate afterwards. And we're also hoping to get another professor along as well, Tyler Cundiff, who teaches sports communication. Okay, so these are the people you can meet afterwards. Anyway, let me introduce you to our stellar panel. And we'll start off with, I'll give each of them a bit of an introduction here. I've got some bio information. And we'll start off with Mará Rose Williams from the Kansas City Star. Thank you for coming along, Mará. Mará Rose Williams is an award-winning journalist who, a year ago, was promoted to Assistant Managing Editor for Race and Equity at the Kansas City Star, where she has worked as a news reporter, columnist and editorial page writer for the past 27 years. In 2020, Mará conceived and wrote, along with three other reporters, the national award-winning Truth in Black and White, a 6-story project in which the Star apologized for decades of failing to fully and truthfully cover Kansas City's black communities. She was the recipient of the Eleanor McClatchley Award for Transformative Journalism, and in 2022 and 2023, she won Best Column Writing by the Press Associations in Kansas and Missouri, respectively. Can we please welcome Mará Rose Williams? Seated beside Mará is Professor Mike Humphrey. Mike teaches here news reporting and writing, mass media and society, and is currently focused on building an innovative, multimedia-focused student media center. So, if you'd like to get involved in journalism on the campus, if you'd like to get a job in journalism on the campus, you need to speak to Mike afterwards. Mike is also the Associate Editor for the International Journal of Listening. His research focuses on narratives in vocations, especially journalism. He was a regular contributor to Forbes.com for a decade, covering the confluence of technology and entertainment. He joined JCCC after 13 years as a professor, newsroom advisor, and PhD graduate at Colorado State University. Can we please welcome Professor Mike Humphrey? Ryan Hennessy is someone I know well because I've worked with Ryan on a few projects myself. Brilliant. It's okay. Perfect. It's okay. And Laura Ziegler. Just before we start. Hey. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Ryan Hennessy is a reporter with Kansas City TV5 News. Ryan's news career has included working as a morning anchor in Lafayette, Louisiana, reporting and anchoring in St. Joseph, Missouri, and most notable, researching and reporting under the leadership of Pulitzer Prize winner Mike McGrath during the last year of his life. Ryan has won 2 Mid-America Emmy Awards for his work on investigative documentaries that looked at evictions and gun violence in the greater Kansas City area. These were 2 films that I helped to make, and I was privileged to work closely with Ryan, who is a terrific journalist. He never lets a fact get away, all right? He's like a dog with a bone. He pursues the truth, and he's a delight to work with. Ryan attended UMKC for journalism, wrote for the student newspaper, and was an intern at KCUR's Up to Date. Can we welcome Ryan Hennessy, please? Laura Ziegler is community editor at KCUR Public Radio, and she teaches mass media and society here. Laura began her career at KCUR as a reporter more than 20 years ago. She became the news director in the mid-1980s, and in 1988 went to National Public Radio in Washington, D.C. In 1992, Laura was awarded a Jefferson Fellowship in Journalism with the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii, which took her to China, Japan, Burma, Bangladesh, and Thailand. I haven't finished yet. 1993, she came back to Kansas City as the Midwest correspondent for National Public Radio. Laura has won numerous prizes for her work, including 3 regional Edward R. Murrow Awards. Can we welcome Laura, please? So I've got these questions. I'm going to try and get through these as quickly as we can do. Keep your questions in the back of your mind and then have a chat with the panel afterwards. Mará, if we could come to you first of all. In the deep end here, could you explain what journalism is and what its value is in today's America?
Lisa, I knew this question was coming. So I kind of jotted some things down just to help me a little bit. You would think after 27 years I wouldn't need help with what is journalism, right? But but what I wrote was that journalism is the use of legally attainable information for the independent pursuit of, this is going to sound corny, but it's true, pursuit of truth, justice, accountability, equity, inclusion, and fairness to protect the constitutional rights of the public, as well as our democracy, coupled with the objective dissemination of information to inform, educate, or delight the general public without fear or favor. That's my definition of journalism. And I think in that definition, you can see why it is so valuable to our society. I mean, let's go back to truth, justice, accountability, equity, inclusion, and fairness. Need I say more?
Is there anyone else on the panel, as I ask these questions, is there anyone else on the panel who would like to add to Mará's answer, or shall I go to the next question? Next question?
Have pretty much covered it.
I was going to say.
Thank you. Ryan, we come to you next, if that's okay. You're a TV news reporter, and I think I'm right in saying you're putting out one story a day. What is it that makes a story a news story? And when you decide that a story is a news story, what do you do to it to really bring that news element to the fore?
So it's one of those things. It varies by the week. Sometimes there's an ebb and flow with what's actually news. You can almost, for example, the Royals were obviously in the playoffs recently. I did a story about what the Yankees were eating before the game. That was a big news story because everybody was interested in more information about the game and who was playing a part in this game. So it can vary greatly. One of the other stories I worked on recently was it's a ongoing battle between KC tenants and landlords here in town. This is basically KC tenants was upset. Well, I mean, everybody was pretty upset with landlords saying, we're not going to rent to people that are on Section 8 housing or people with prior evictions. And that's just really on its face income discrimination. So the Kansas City passed an ordinance, justifiably so, to try to make sure that it was equal rights for everybody to find good housing in Kansas City. Well, about a week ago, landlords in Kansas City filed a federal lawsuit to try to pause this from taking place, this ordinance, citing that it's forcing them to rent to people on Section 8 housing, which is a voluntary program is what they're arguing. So for that story, we had to obviously reach out to the landlords and find somebody that would actually talk to me on the record. And that took a little bit of doing. It's a lot of negotiation behind the scenes, saying, hey, what are you comfortable talking to me about? Because the other thing I have to worry about is trying to get them on camera, which is a lot of times the biggest challenge I have in my medium is can I get them to actually talk and show their face on TV? And then obviously KC tenants, I'm going to talk to them. So it's a challenging thing right there. This story is you hate to say it, but sometimes it's one versus the other, and I don't like to do that in stories because it's never that simple as black versus white. It's just not like that. There's a lot of gray areas. But in that one, this is kind of the framing of the story, because obviously these groups are always going back and forth with each other. And then to even that out, I tried to find a law professor at UMKC to talk to me about kind of what he thinks is going to be the outcome of this lawsuit. So that's how I framed that story that day. Luckily, that day was it's a daily turn, like Mike was saying. So I had to just hope that everybody's going to actually get back in contact with me as soon as possible, because I have a 3 p.m. hard deadline to get my story on at 4 and 5 o'clock every day. So that one I got lucky. And it was also Friday, which was just kind of amazing. It's just like everybody's like normal people out there when you're doing stories. They're on the same schedule. They're looking towards the weekend too. Sometimes they don't return their calls on Friday. But that's it. I mean, it really varies what a story is. But I mean, if you're inspired by something and you pitch a meeting or pitch a story to your editors, and you can show off how important this is because you believe in it, I think that's going to get greenlit every time. It's all about your passion towards what stories need to be told in Kansas City that can kind of like get you on the right path to telling that story. But there is a lot of times you are assigned to something, and you got to make a good story. Make sure you try to find both sides of it.
Laura, if we come to you, you're the community editor for KCUR Public Radio. Could you explain what community-based journalism is and why it's uniquely important?
Sure. Well, I'll start first by saying, to Ryan's credit, any of you that are interested in going into TV journalism, it is a grind. I mean, what he just described to you is a really, really demanding, rigorous day to try and figure out what your story is and to get your sources and to get it on the air, hard deadline at 3 o'clock. But it's fun, right? It is fun. I work for public media. I spent most of my career in radio. But in terms of community engagement, which is what I do, it's a type of journalism that really flips traditional journalism on its head in a way. Traditionally, as Ryan just described, he has a story pitch. He decides he's going to talk about this challenge that landlords and tenants have, avoiding discrimination and a lawsuit, and he goes out and he thinks about who he needs to talk about to tell that story, and talks to those people and puts it together, and it's super informative, and his stories always are, and then it goes out that day. Community engagement takes a little bit of a longer view, and we, rather than say we want to tell this story, we've decided maybe that the affordable housing is an issue in Kansas City, which it is, and we think we need to figure out what the stories are that are relevant to the community. So we identify a few different communities that we're going to go to and ask them, how does this issue affect you? What is the media not understanding? What are the misperceptions about your experience? And then we listen to them, we come back and we sort of tease apart the themes. And again, to Ryan's point, there is a lot about these issues that aren't black and white. I mean, when we're talking about human beings, we all know we're complex, and our problems and our challenges and our lives are complicated. And just like with landlords and tenants, it's not that they have that there's a good guy and a bad guy. It's often much more complicated than that. So we come back and we tease apart what we've heard and try and figure out what content we can produce. If it's a talk show, or if it's a feature story, or maybe it's news spots, maybe we're going to just follow up on the legal angle and do something related to that. So that's really, does that make sense? How it sort of differs than traditional journalism.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. Mike, why is student journalism important?
I think in many ways the answer is the same as everything you've been hearing. To me, the most important thing you learn as a student journalist is how to report for a community, the community being the college campus that you are on. That's important because it gives you contact with the people you're impacting with your work. And my first few jobs out of college were at very small towns, Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, Marion, Illinois, and Menominee, Wisconsin. And, I had to go to the grocery store with these folks. I knew the impact I was having on their lives with the decisions I was making, the reporting I was doing, both good and bad. And understanding that is really an important part of how you start your career. So a campus media is great for that, because you're going to be sitting in class with people who have watched, read, listened to your work, and you're going to understand the work had a role in their lives in some way. By understanding that, I think you start from a place of personal ethic and community. I'm a real believer in community journalism. I wish we hadn't lost that thread, because it was really important back in the 90s when I started. I'm glad to see that coming back. And I think part of the reason why it's so important is because we have learned, as we listen as journalists, that we've done real harm in communities when we don't pay attention in the right ways. And the way the Kansas City Star, which I also worked for back in the late in the 2000s, the way the Kansas City Star covered the community, Black community, for instance, was sometimes abhorrent, and that was true of the TV stations as well. And so I'm glad to see that repair and recovery occurring in this community. A kind of healing needs to happen, and all of those lessons can be learned on a college campus, because everything we're dealing with in a community is reflected in a college campus in one way or another. I'm really excited to be here because Kansas City is the home of my heart, even though I was born in Denver and I'm still a Broncos fan. I'm sorry about that. But the care for the community is going to be an important part of what we learn in our student media as we rebuild it here.
Mari, can you provide an example of when your journalism has had a positive impact on Kansas City? Just one example.
Well, did you plan it so that it works this way? As Mike was just talking about the Truth in Black and White, the project that the Kansas City Star took on in 2020, in which we apologize for decades of failed coverage of particularly the Black community in Kansas City. What we did was in case you hadn't read it, we hadn't covered the Black community fairly. In other words, we wrote about the Black community for the most part when they were perpetrators of crime, victims of crime. We described them in our journalism overall. And let me just say, it was not just the Kansas City Star that did this. This was national. This is what news organizations did nationally. Describing Black Americans as poorly educated, low income, and here's the problem with all of that, is that if you don't live next to people of color, which people didn't because there were systemic situations put into place to keep that from happening, if you didn't go to school with people of color, which a lot of people didn't. And if you didn't if you didn't work with them, the only thing you knew about the Black people in your community was what you read in your newspaper. Therefore, the newspaper or the TV station or whatever the news organization was guilty of perpetuating racism. And so we needed to apologize for that, which the Star did. But we didn't just apologize. We also went back and did the research and dug in and found the situations, huge situations in Kansas City where we had done these things to show people exactly what we were apologizing for. And I say that was probably, for me, even though I like to think that all of the journalism I've done in my career has been impactful, but I think that was most impactful because it changed not only the way the Kansas City Star approaches the community and reports on its community, but as you just heard, it made other news organizations go, whoa, we did that too. How do we do a better job of covering all of our population in our community? How can we be more equitable in our journalism and more inclusive in our journalism? So yes, we reflect on ourselves, but it forced the reflection of other news organizations on themselves as well. And so that's why it had so much of a much broader impact than anything else I've ever done in journalism.
Laura, can you provide an example of when a community has been impacted positively by your journalism?
One of the things that's really hard about community engagement journalism is that it's hard to measure impact because we don't know what the long-term impact of going and listening to people will be or stories that we tell. We're trying to get better at defining some metrics for that. But the way I think about it is public media in particular has pretty much lived in a bubble. I think historically and demographics bear it out today, sort of the privilege of white, better, more well-educated, high-income population. That's more of the demographic historically. That is really changing, and we're making an effort to change it by going out to these communities. And so part of the way I think about it is how many people do we expose to our content? And how many people do we follow up with? And how many people do we put on our talk shows or in our stories that we might not have known about if we hadn't gone to talk to them? We spent 6 months in the Latino community, which is 13% of our population in the Kansas City metro. And we did stories about things that we would never have heard of if we hadn't gone out to listen to them. We found out things that we wouldn't have known if we had just gone about our journalism in the traditional way. We spent 6 months doing a series on gun violence, and that was sort of an issue-driven initiative. We tried to figure out ways to tell that story based on what we heard from people in the community, like young people aren't afraid of going to jail. That's why, so many young people are involved in violent crime, that going to jail doesn't feel like punishment to them. So we went to a prison and talked to a man who was doing 3 life sentences for murder about how he felt about the gun crime that he had committed. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective, 30 years in jail doing 3 life sentences on a gun crime. And hopefully that had an impact on some of the young people that may be listening and thinking about that issue.
Some people do what Laura said. One of the things that we found when we were doing our project, and this goes to what Laura was just talking about, was when, and I knew this for years, that you would go into the Black community and talk to people, and they would say, we don't read your paper. We don't read any mainstream paper. And they would say that because they would say there's nothing in there that reflects who we really are. We do not see ourselves in your paper. So they stop reading mainstream newspaper, listening to mainstream media at all. So our job and what Laura is doing, that engagement piece that she's talking about, from that we found out that you have to build a bridge of engagement, to build a bridge of trust before you can bring those people back into the media. And what Laura is doing, and what I do also, and newspapers across the country have started doing, was going into those communities. You can't call them on the phone. That's not going to build trust. You have to get down into the trench with them, talk to them, get to know them. Once they know you, then they begin to trust you and see you, and then you begin to build back that trust and understanding that we lost because of the way we had covered those communities in the past. So that's why what Laura does is so incredibly important.
Thank you very much. Ryan, you've carried out long-term deep dive investigations as well as working now as a news reporter. To carry out those deep dive investigations, to be an effective journalist, I suppose, what skill set do you think you need?
Oh, well, some of the best skills I got was actually the internships I took. So that's definitely one thing, a great path if you are getting close to senior year, junior year. KCPBS, great one. KCUR, incredible one. There's just a lot of people there that you'll learn from. I learned from Laura Ziegler while I was there. Peggy Lowe is another one that's an incredible reporter at KCUR. one of the stories that she did that was just, I'm still blown away by it. It's just the impact it had on me was inspirational. The tragedy that happened at the Chiefs Super Bowl last year on February 14th is just really tough to take. And she followed around these people from the community that still have bullet fragments inside their body, and it's just the impact it's made on those people's lives. But that's hard. I mean, it is constantly following up with those people to make sure that they're comfortable telling you intimate moments about their life. Those deep dives are just, and I mean, what you get out of it is just, I mean, we need a change as a city. Everybody kind of realizes that we have way too much gun violence in Kansas City. Our homicide rate is low this year, but our non-fatal shootings is up through the roof. And it's just one of those things. It's a scary moment in Kansas City, but coming together as a community, these stories that you're telling in journalism gives a chance for people to move that needle. And that's the biggest part I get out of it. That's why I love working with Michael so much. Last year we did a story on nursing homes, and it was assisted nursing home facilities. There's just a bunch of different types of these out here, but these facilities aren't investigated, or they're not audited too much, and that just makes for these holes in service for people that are older that can't care for themselves. That's why they go into these assisted care facilities. And we found out, I think it was, Michael, was it 6 people were investigating these care facilities like in the state? I sent him an article maybe a couple months ago how they increased those numbers. They have more people that are doing investigations now because, and I hope that it was something to do with that story that we did. But it's, when you see something like that, you feel like you had an impact. And that's honestly, I love this job because telling stories is fun. You get to put a little bit of yourself in those stories every day, but whenever you get to see that actually some change come about, that's what it's all about. I mean, you're never more proud of what you're able to do. And there's not like, you're not going to get somebody that's going to pat you on your back or maybe get the raise or whatever, but it's something personal. It's a rewarding feeling that you just can't match anywhere else in life. That's just the inspiration I get out of doing stories.
Thank you. We've got 8 minutes left and then we're going to break, okay? So we have to speed up. This next question, I'm going to split, if I may, between Mike and Laura. Mike, why do journalists need to be good listeners? And what does that involve? And then we'll come to you and how you listen to communities, if that's okay. But Mike, why do journalists need to be good listeners? And what does that involve?
Yeah, I think the reason Michael's asking me this is because the research I did as a researcher at Colorado State was how listening occurs in different vocations, and especially listening for people's narratives. And because I wanted to teach journalists how to do this better, I didn't go to journalists to ask this question. I went to nurses and ER doctors and people who run companies. And so we did a whole set on healers, and then we did a whole set on leaders to understand the way they are listening and the way that is affecting the work that they do. And what we found is the more you know about somebody's story, even if it's just a little bit, the more likely you are to care for them in the way that they need to be cared for. And so how do you do that? Part of it is by listening carefully to the strings that they are providing with you in the first place and following up on those questions to sort of take track of how they think about their life. And this, I think, connects to exactly what you were saying earlier about going into a community and listening to what the community thinks about itself. And it has the effect of creating the kind of trust we were hearing about as well. So the combination of those two things is really important. The other thing is, to be a good listener, we kept hearing you have to eradicate a lot of the assumptions that you have going into the listening itself. That's really important to community journalism as well. And so that's why we're doing the research that we're doing to help journalists get better at this, to do the kinds of things that we all aspire to do as journalists.
It's really hard to know, first of all, what your own biases and assumptions are. I think that the first challenge for us was to realize that we're making decisions about what we ask communities just by deciding what questions we ask and what questions we don't ask. why are we asking one thing as opposed to another? It's because we somehow think it's important. It doesn't necessarily mean the people that we're talking to want to answer that question or think that issue is important. So that's number one in terms of a challenge. In terms of technique, the other thing that we have found is that we started out doing all this outreach, going to say to people, hey, we're going to be at the Bluford Library, or we're going to be at the Ruiz Library, or we're going to be at the downtown library, come talk to us. That's giving people homework. That's asking them to do something in addition to what they're already doing. So we sort of flipped a little bit and decided that we were only going to partner with organizations that already had the trust of people in the community, where people were already going. So we weren't asking them to come on a night and get childcare or miss whatever they needed to do or make time for us, and go where they already were and maybe get on a neighborhood association's agenda or go to a community center where they were already having a public meeting. Occasionally we would set up meetings, but it's much more respectful, I think, to go where people already are and say, help us, rather than, we need you to help us come to where we are when we want you to be there. We reach out a lot on social media. Did you ask how we do it? We do a lot of social media. We go to Facebook pages where communities are posting things. We put stuff on the air, appeals on the air. We have a text line that's very useful called Ground Source. There are a number of these different tools now where we say, tell us XYZ, what we want to know about, and text us. And we get a lot of information that way. But building trust is hard. And it takes going back and back and back. It's not just a one-time thing.
Thank you. Let's keep going. Mará, question for you. We've got young people here today, young people watching this, and they're thinking about who they are and what type of career they might be best suited to. When they're thinking about who they are, what sort of list of attributes, characteristics do you think need, ideally, to be there if they're going to make a successful journalist?
I'll start this by telling you who I was as a child, and that might give you some insight. I was the nosiest child in the room. I mean, I had to be in everybody's business. I wanted to know what everything was going on. If some adults were talking in another room, I would be the child that would be hanging around the corner listening to hear what they were saying. And not only was I nosy, but my mom used to remind me that I could not keep a secret. So when I told my mother that I wanted to be a news reporter, she goes, perfect. So I say all of that to say that curiosity is the number one, the most fundamental characteristic of a journalist. Curiosity. You have to want to know what's going on. You also need empathy, and you have to have a insane lack of fear. Because I was 19 years old in Appalachia, from New York, but in Appalachia, and being sent into the mountains to knock on someone's door, little black me from New York, and ask questions. And I was so stupid, too stupid to be afraid, and curious enough to want to know the answer to the questions I was going to ask. So I think that those are the fundamental characteristics of what it takes to at least start to become a good journalist.
Thank you. Mike, what upcoming opportunities are there for students to work here on campus as journalists?
Thank you for asking that question, Michael. We are tonight going to make two major decisions with our first meeting of the board that guides our Student Media Center. One is a new name, so we'll have a new name by the end of the night, and we'll be letting you know that in many, many, many ways going forward, and a new editor. So both those decisions are a big first step. From that comes many opportunities. We want writers, photographers, videographers, podcasters, marketing people, social media people. We are going to tell stories. We're going to learn to tell stories in as many different ways as possible with this new media center. And we are going to tell them about this community first and foremost. When we look beyond this community, the only reason to do that is because it will benefit the community in some way. And so by learning that and focusing on that, you are going to learn the most important things you need to know, not just how to do journalism, because I wouldn't be a journalism educator if I thought it was only to end up in journalism. Learning journalism teaches you how to navigate life in ways you cannot imagine until you are in the situation where you're knocking on a door that maybe you're, a little bit naive to know what's behind that door. And, I've seen some things behind that door I wish I could forget like that as well. But, learning how to do that well teaches you how to be better at anything else you might end up doing in your life. And that's why I think I would want every major possible represented, every program that we have on campus represented in some way in our media, because you don't have to want to be a professional journalist to experience this in wonderful ways and to learn something that's going to be important for your career.
Thank you. And then one final question for all of you, if that's okay. We'll start with you though, Ryan. What advice would you give students here who may be interested in becoming journalists after their studies? I mean, obviously they should be talking to Mike after this, but what else can they do to help them further to get that career secured for after their studies?
Well, I said it earlier. I think that's the most important thing to do is already be looking. There's internships out there that you can take during your junior, senior year. I think we actually had a couple, a freshman and a sophomore at KCTV5. They're helping out on the desk. So they were taking phone calls from people and writing up digital stories, but there's opportunities out there to get inside those newsrooms and see what it looks like and see if you can imagine yourself in there. So that's the number one thing, is try to find those. There's a bunch of them available. Mine, again, was KCUR and PBS. Those are just great. They have a lot of smart people there. They will be patient with you, because everybody, we're all work in progresses, but definitely for journalism students, you have to walk before you can run. I wasn't able to do live shots, day one after I got out of college. It took a while to actually be able to build up that confidence and not say and every 5 seconds to bother the person that's watching me on TV. So it takes a while, but just look for those opportunities. This sounds like a great one too. And even if you don't do journalism is a great path to find out what the rest of the world is. You're never going to be exposed to more circles ever in your life than if you do journalism, because you're going to be going to different events and find out about things that you never knew you're going to be thrown into. And that, if you see how big the world is, that kind of also helps you figure out where you want to be too in the world. I think it's the best job you can do. Is everybody should have to do journalism for at least 1 year. That's my thing. But yeah, look for those opportunities now. It's my advice.
Anything to add, anybody?
I do think the internships around are valuable. I know at KCUR our interns work like that. They end up working like staff people. We working pretty hard, and they're out on the street and covering things. I think all the news organizations look for some of the community newspapers and the community news outlets as well. You may get more hands-on, more direct experience that way. Pursue other interests, the other kinds of things that you're interested in. What do you like to do in your leisure time? Do you like to hike? Do you like to sew? Do you like to cook? Find those kind of things that are interesting too. The one thing about journalism is that it's pretty all-consuming, and it's not the kind of job that you come in at 9 and leave at 5. You really do take it with you. And I think that if you do end up pursuing journalism, you need to have that other stuff to balance your life. But I think that's important in general.
The only thing I would add is, first of all, there's some people from the Kansas City Star here that came, the team of folks from the Kansas City Star. But I don't want you to think of journalism as just, gathering information and writing or reporting information. There are so many various different sections that help make journalism happen. The Kansas City Star doesn't just happen without so many other jobs, like there's audience jobs and people who are working social media for us and marketing, and all of those things help to make journalism happen. And so when you think about what you want to do in journalism, think broadly than just the telling of the story itself, because that doesn't happen without all the other support that goes around journalism. And if you love something or you want to do something, do it.
I'll just very briefly add, try it. We're just a lab here. It's the perfect time to try something and just see what you think. That's the biggest gift we can give you, is the opportunity to give it a go.
Thank you so much to our panel. Can we give them a round of applause, please? And to say what we'll do now is we'll have the breakout. So our panel members and the team from the Kansas City Star will go to their various tables over there. Nate Herron, Kansas City Chiefs voice, is here as well. Tyler Cundiff, there he is, Tyler. We'll get a sticker on you as well. Tyler teaches sports communication here. That's right, isn't it, Tyler? The students, I'd advise you to have a chat with these two as well if you're interested in those courses. There's free pizza and there's soda here as well. But thank you so much. I'm Professor Michael Price. Thank you so much for coming along today. Thank you.